Hi, women in retail leaders. Welcome to episode 3 of Women in Retail Talks. I'm Melissa Campanelli, co-founder of the Women in Retail Leadership Circle. In today's episode, we're excited to offer a presentation that was given by Michelle Peluso, the CEO of fashion retailer Gilt, at our recent Girl Talks event in New York City. Today, you'll hear Michelle's secrets to success.
Well, I have the great pleasure of not having to talk about retail and not having to talk about digital marketing, which will get great expertise from later, but really to talk about leadership. And I would be remiss in mentioning that if it's not entirely inspiring for me to talk about leadership with some of my colleagues and former colleagues and friends here. And a big thanks to Jacqueline and Lee and Sarah and Snara and others for showing up. So thank you. I get every day to work with just really, truly awesome women. And if I'm ever having one of those tough days that we occasionally have, it's super inspiring to me to be able to look at somebody like Lee and just feel what a privilege it is to be a leader at Gilt. So what I thought is I would talk a little bit about what a fascinating time it is to be a woman leader, a woman in retail, and particularly a young woman in business. When I was growing up, I remember in 8th grade I had to do a program. I had to do sort of a research project, and I decided to research the elementary reading school program. And so I went through every book that we read as part of elementary reading school from kindergarten to 4th grade, and I counted the number of women, the number of men, the number of biographies about women, number of biographies about men, number of careers women were in, number of careers men were in, and it was really stunning. Women were featured in, I think, 3 or 4 careers, and men were in about 70. I think there were 2 biographies about women. I think there were, dozens and dozens about men that you learned over the course of your career. And flash forward, not that long. I'm not that old, thankfully. And it's amazing to me how far women have come. The previous generations, you think about the Eleanor Roosevelts and the Elizabeth Cady Stantons and the Indira Gandhis and all these incredible women Katharine Graham, who fought so hard, Harriet Beecher Stowe, to move the world, to move generations of men, to really allow women to take place in business. And then I also think about I had the privilege of spending some time with Malala this summer, and I think about all those girls anywhere in the world, really many places in the world, who would give their right arm or their right leg to be where you are right now, to sit where you sit, to be at a dinner in this rarefied air where you can choose your own career and decide who you're going to marry and determine how you're going to live your life and make the choices that you make for yourself. And all of that, to me, means there's this connective tissue. There's this fiber that connects those extraordinary women, and we stand on their backs and their shoulders, there's no doubt. And all these girls around the world who look to you, whether you realize it or not, as their role models. You're the ones that give them hope somewhere that it's okay to sneak into a school and learn to read, even if their parents don't want them to do that or their father doesn't want them to do that. And to me, that means it is an extraordinary time to be a woman, and it is an extraordinary time to be in the United States. And I would argue there has never been a better time or a better country to be a woman leader. And that's also about responsibility. I have a daughter. She is 7 years old, and she is full of life and joy and energy and very much like me in good ways and bad. And I think a lot about her and about what I can do to pass that lifeline to her, but what you all do by leading in your own companies and in your own industries to open up the world for girls like her, so that when she comes up, she can sit at a dinner like this and feel it's a privilege to be a woman in business and a woman in retail. So their world is ours to shape in the same way that so many shape the world that we've inherited. So I thought about this. I thought about, what do I want my daughter to know about leadership, and what do I want in turn to pass on to all of you, the lessons I've learned, and really 5 principles I hold dear. The first one is build other people up. And I know that's always not the most popular thing. I'm sure there's been many situations where you sit in a room and you see men who sort of tear other people down, or other women who tear people down, and you think sometimes, is that the path to success? I can tell you from where I stand and all the experience I've had, there's no better way to earn the title of leadership, to build the loyalty of your team, than to build other people up. Consciously developing and thinking about where people want to go and your role, part of that responsibility and accountability, how do you get them there? There's been so many times for me that the idea of doing something with friends and building other people up has mattered. I started my career pretty early. I was in the White House, and then I went over and started a company, Site 59. And I did it with some of my closest friends, Sanara's husband being one of them. And I think about how extraordinary it was over a whole bunch of years to build something with people I admired and respected and valued. And the business world is always up and down. There's always a roller coaster, and I'll come back to that. But building other people up and surrounding yourself with extraordinary people, to me, really makes a huge difference. Secondly, cultivating self-doubt and overcoming the natural instinct to always believe you're right. And again, that's a bit of a hard message, but there's this extraordinary thing that I think happens. The more and more you lead, the higher your position gets. In some ways, the easier it is to become isolated. You're in a bit of an ivory tower. People tell you you're awesome. They tell you what you want to hear. And in some ways, you have this sort of supreme myth of total confidence and that you're always right. And that, I think, surrounds many times people as they become more and more senior. But I say actively cultivate some self-doubt and surround yourself with people who are going to call a spade and help you to be a better leader. I think that's more true now than ever as the world's moving faster and faster. There was a great philosopher, speechwriter named David Foster Wallace who wrote a book called This Is Water. It ended up being a commencement address he gave at Kenyon College. And have you read or heard the Kenyon College commencement address? It was pretty remarkable because he talked about these two little fish swimming through the water, and they passed this big fish swimming in the opposite direction. The big fish says to the two little fish, well, how's your day, and how do you like this water today? And the fish nod and smile and swim on, and they're like, what water? Is he talking water? What's water? And the idea being that it can become so easy to sometimes not even recognize the truest of things, the realest of things, the biggest reality, because we're so psychologically created to kind of, sometimes not let things permeate and see the world through our own eyes. But being a leader is about being able to see the world through other people's eyes and seeing the situation as it might appear on the other side of the world. And I think surrounding yourself with people who believe what you believe, of course, and are passionate about what you're passionate about, but can challenge you and can help you call a spade, ends up being incredibly critical. David Foster said, going down that path is inadvertent closed-mindedness, and that's a form of self-imprisonment. And so this idea that to have the confidence and the grace to be able to challenge and put people around you who will challenge yourself, to me, is a really critical aspect of leadership. At Travelocity, when I ran the company, after a couple years, I instituted a policy where the senior team and I took 360s and then made some of that public to each other. So I published my 360 to my team, and they in turn published some of their 360, and then we went out and told the company what we got to get better at as leaders. And believe me, that's brutal. That's not easy to do. I'm not sitting here saying that's the easiest thing in the world, but the idea that we can all get better, we're all on a journey, and that we all have to be supporting each other on that journey, I think, is a very important one. Third, a lesson I've learned from Mark Parker. I'm the board of Nike, and that is, of course, an incredible privilege. And Mark, who I happen to think is sort of the best CEO in America, he's a very thoughtful person. And one day we were talking, and I was asking him, Nike is just such an extraordinary machine for innovation and has done so many, has gone through so many sort of reinventions of itself over time. And we were having this conversation about, the role of the CEO and all this information and all this data and, just how the world's getting faster and all these devices. And I think that's so true of retail. It's like, okay, well, how do we add this app and this feature and that function in-store and this? And he said, my job is to edit to amplify. And I think there's something very profound. We all saw, Tim Cook is also on the board, we've all seen what Apple's done to simplify and make more elegant the user experience at Apple. And it's interesting when you think about that from a leadership perspective. And I thought Mark was so profound when he said, I have tons of people thinking about tons of different ideas and responding to lots of different stimuli from across the world. My job is to edit to amplify so that I can take the best ideas, cull them down, figure out what's most important, and then make sure that I'm using my role and my voice to get obstacles out of their way and amplify their efforts. And I think it's really critical. I think that we all know that, as leaders, there's so many opportunities and there's so much happening, and this competitor's doing this and that competitor's doing that. And in retail, it's a very transformational time. It's a transformational time where the next generation of consumers wants intensely digital experience, has grown up with a different set of expectations around convenience and style and experience than we all even grew up with. My daughter, we were waiting online for a car rental bus the other day. We were traveling to see my husband's grandmother, and the bus wasn't coming, and there was an Avis bus that came and another bus that came, and she's like, I don't understand. Can you just look it up in your app? Where are they? And she's like 5 years old, 7 years old, and she's wanting me to look up in my app where the national car rental bus is. And I was like, well, they don't actually do that. She's like, well, can't you Uber them or something? Like, can't they just Uber themselves? Like, she doesn't get it. And so, she's like, just pull up your Google Maps. Where are they? And so I'm like, well, but her expectations and her demands of all of us in retail and as leaders will be profoundly different even than the generation right before hers. And so there can be a tendency to almost swarm all of that and try to think about add. I think the real genius is edit to amplify, simplify, make things more streamlined and more simplified. And that requires, I would argue, much more discipline, much more intellect, much more conviction than just kind of being additive. And so being reductive in some ways is harder, but I think it's what the consumer demands of us. And frankly, I think it's what our employees demand of us. Put them on the most important things, get them really charged up. The fourth thing is it's the hard times that count the most, and that's a bit of a bummer, but it's true. It'd be nice if it were always the glory, the great sales month, the great days that counted the most in leadership, but it's not. It's the hard times that matter the most. And I'm a big avid study of biographers, and I think about Churchill and his down years before the war and all these leaders. And Abraham Lincoln, you never read an extraordinary biography without knowing that the leadership came and the seeds of greatness came when things were hard, when times were tough. And I've experienced that, I'm sure we all have. But we were a Ground Zero company at Site 59. We were selling last-minute travel, and we were located 2 blocks off Ground Zero. And so you go through an experience like that where we were selling last-minute travel. Believe me, that was not that popular on September 12th and weekend travel. But our people saw things they should never see, and people experienced things they should never experience. And I was 27, 28 years old, leading a company of people. We had thousands of customers stranded around the country. We lost our office. We couldn't find our last employees. Thank God everybody was safe, but until really late that night. And you think about, how do you show up? What makes you you? What makes you? How do you honor this team of people? How do you fight for what you believe in? How do you be the best possible leader you can be when you yourself are scared and you yourself are going through something difficult? And it's been true many times as I first came to Travelocity as CEO and realized we had to outsource a lot of our call centers, and that meant letting 1,500 people know we were going to move their jobs offshore. Or when I was at Citi and watched Vikram Pandit in the midst of the crisis where the stock went from $90 down to 99 cents in the course of a couple months. And you think about a team of people, 350,000 people, who are depending on Citi for their jobs. And you watch that and you see and you experience those crises, and that's what counts. It's the hard things that shape us. It's the tough things that make us aware of our potential and make us dig deep inside to persevere, to persist, and to be extraordinary leaders. And when you're going through that hard time, when you're experiencing those tough things, because if you're going to take risk, and if you're going to lead, and if you're going to be bold, you're going to have tough times. There's going to be those down times. If you're going to do it, find those people around you who can give you that strength, those friends, those family, that outside activity, who can help build you up, because you need to be your best when times are their toughest. And while that can be sometimes overwhelming, the flip side is there's nothing like going through a crisis with a team of people you believe in and getting to the other side and realizing just how much more depth you have as a leader and your team has as a result. And to me, ultimately, those are the things that really count. When you want to earn, title of manager can be given freely. Title of leader is earned. Title of leader is a privilege. And those are the times when it matters most. And finally, and then I'll open it up for some questions, it's all about grace. And that dovetails with my fourth message. My daughter's middle name is Grace. Her name is Auden Grace. And when she was born, I wrote her a letter. I write each of my kids letters when I'm on long plane trips, and they each have a box, and they don't get their box of letters until they go to college. And I'm sure I'm repeating myself, and who knows, over time as I handwrite these letters out and put them in their box. But the first letter my daughter got was a letter about why her middle name was Grace. And it was a very thoughtful choice for my husband and I, because grace is really one of my favorite words. And it is because I think it's true for all people, but especially when I'm talking to young women and women in their careers. If you're going to be bold, and I beg you to be bold, I beg you to take risk, I beg you to lead, because those girls in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Africa, you are their heroes, you are their role models, and so I beg you to live bold, audacious, courageous lives. And if you're going to do that, there will be those times when you stumble. There'll be those times when you aren't as good of a mom, or you weren't as good at work, or you didn't do as much on the board you said you were going to do, or the rest of it. That's going to happen. As a matter of fact, just recently, I'm a first grade class mom, which is, don't ask me why. That was a suicidal choice, I have to say. But you have to do these projects with the kids, and it's last minute, and I'm furiously up printing some ridiculous paper flower things we can all cut apart. And then my other child's in kindergarten, and the kindergarten class mom made these ridiculous. It will probably be at our mantelpiece forever. Handcrafted birds' nests with painted robin's eggs, and then handcrafted birds with real feathers she had gathered from the farmhouse or something. I don't know. My children in my class have these dinky paper flowers on a straw that's falling over, and so. Anyway, my point is, there will be occasionally times you let people down, and sometimes even yourself. And when you're juggling, there will be those occasional drop balls, and that's when you need grace. And grace to me is about humility, and it's about perseverance, and it's about learning and picking yourself up. It's about supporting others on their journey. It's about making sure you always come back to be the best you, that the best is always ahead, that the best leader you can be is always in front of you, that you're always striving to be better, that you're always willing to pick yourself up, that you support other people, that you approach lessons with confidence, but also humility. And so I wrote this letter to my daughter that, I hope she has a big, bold life. I hope she strives madly. I hope she dreams big. I hope she uses this precious time on earth to make a difference. And I hope she keeps grace along with her on the journey. And with that, you can tell I'm highly passionate about the topic.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Women in Retail Talks. Please check out our podcast channel page for show notes. Women in Retail Talks is available on iTunes and Stitcher, and make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. Lastly, please follow us on Twitter at WIR Leadership or on Instagram at WIR Leadership. Thanks, and I look forward to you joining us in our next episode of Women in Retail Talks.